Good morning, everyone. It's time for Monday at the Museum. I am Gayla Keesee, and I am Education Manager here at the Augusta Museum of History. And today we have a very special topic. We're going to be talking about quilts. Now, you may ask, what is a quilt? Well, let's talk about that. Do you have something that makes you feel warm and cozy and special? Maybe a stuffed animal or a blanket? How does your special lovey make you feel? My son had a special yellow fuzzy blanket when he was your age, and he would wrap up in it and he would cuddle with me at night, and we both felt safe and happy. Do you do that with your mom or your dad? Well, today we're talking about quilts. And a quilt is a special covering. It is similar to a blanket, except that it is made out of scraps or pieces of fabric or other materials that are sewn together. Do you have any quilts at your house? Well, quilt is now considered an American folk art. And so we see them hanging in museums, or we even see them hanging on walls. But originally, pioneer women first sewed those quilts, and they did so to make use of the fabric scraps and to bring warmth and color to their plain homes and their rough lives. And those quilts were used to keep people warm, just like our lovey. Does your family or someone you know own something that's been passed down from generation to generation? Many times quilts are passed down, and these are called heirlooms. An heirloom doesn't have to be expensive, but it does need to hold a special story and have a special meaning to the people who keep it. Think about that. Ask Mom if y'all have anything like that. The Quilt Story is about an heirloom that is passed down. As I read the story, listen carefully to see if you can decide why the quilt is so special to the characters in the story. The Quilt Story. Look at the little girl, and she is in her bedroom. Isn't that quilt pretty? It's got stars and hearts and even doves on the bottom. The Quilt Story is by Tony Johnston, and the pictures are by Tommy DePaulo. And it's got the name Abigail on it and all those hearts and flowers. Doesn't that make you feel fun? A little girl's mother made the quilt to keep her warm when the snow came down long ago. She stitched the quilt by a yellow flame, humming all the time. She stitched the tails of the falling stars, and she stitched the name Abigail. Abigail loved the quilt. She wrapped it round her in the quiet dark and watched the winter skies. Sometimes she saw a falling star. Sometimes Abigail played in the woods near her home. She had tea, and her dolls had tea, and the quilt had tea all over it. Sometimes she pretended the quilt was a gown. She wore it to town on her horse, clop, 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 and it tore. So her mother stitched it up once more. Sometimes she played hide and seek with her sisters. She laughed and cried, "Don't peek!" under the quilt, and everyone found her. Sometimes Abigail was sick. She sneezed and sneezed. Then she slept under the quilt, and she felt better. One day, Abigail's family moved away, across the wide rivers and over a rock-hard trail. The quilt went too. not stuffed in trunks with the blankets and clothes. It kept the little girls warm from the wild winds, warm from the rain, warm from the sparkling nights. They built a new house in the woods. Abigail's father built it with his hatchet. Chop, chop, chop. He built her new bed. Chip, chip, chip. He made her a new house and a new horse, too. He worked until curly shavings covered the floor, and everyone sneezed and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. But Abigail felt sad. New house, new horse, new bed. Everything smelled of fresh chops and chips. Everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, then tucked her in, and Abigail felt at home again under the quilt. One day, when the quilt was very old and very loved, Abigail folded it carefully and put it in the attic. Everyone forgot it was there. A gray mouse came and loved the quilt. Her babies were born on top of it. They grew fat and gray in the warm stuffing. When they got hungry, they ate a falling star. A raccoon came and loved the quilt. She dug a hole in a corner with her black paws and hid an apple there. A cat came and loved the quilt. A patchwork cat. It rolled on the stars and stuffing spilled out like snow. Then the cat curled up in the snow and purred. "Kitty, kitty," called a little girl. She found her cat and she found the quilt, splashed with patterns of sun. The little girl wrapped the quilt around her, and she loved it too. "Can you make it like new?" she asked her mother. So her mother patched the holes. She put fresh stuffing in it. She stitched long tails on the stars to swish across the quilt again. One day, the little girl's family moved away, across miles and miles of pavement and snaking gray highways. They found a new house, freshly cleaned, freshly waxed, freshly painted white. They unpacked and unpacked all night, and everyone sneezed on cardboard dust and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. And the little girl felt sad. Everything smelled of white paint and boxes, everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, then tucked her in, and she felt at home again under the quilt. Abigail. So what are the names that are on the quilt? Right? Abigail, because that was the name of the first girl who had that quilt. What are some ways that Abigail used her quilt? Do you remember? I remember the tea parties where the dolls had tea, she had tea, and the quilt had tea. Do you remember? One of the things I liked about it is that she rode her horse to town, but then she got it caught and ripped, and her mother had to fix it, right? One of my favorite things is that she wraps herself up in it, very much like my son did when he wrapped his yellow fuzzy blanket and then cuddled with me, just like Abigail and the little girl do in the rocking chair with their mothers. Abigail put the quilt in the attic, and it was passed down, just like our heirloom. But a new family got it, right? Yeah. And they loved it just as much as Abigail did. The animals loved it too, right? This beautiful quilt is on display at the Augusta Museum of History. It is the last installment of the Quilting Legacy exhibition that we have been highlighting different quilts from our collection over the past year. This particular quilt is a grandmother's flower garden quilt, and it was pieced together and sewn together in the 1930s. It is made out of 39 different flowers, and there are 19 hexagon pieces. So this quilt is a wonderful example of the grandmother's flower garden style. The cool thing about it is that it is made out of feed sacks. So feed sacks originated in the 1800s, but they started out being canvas bags, but then moved to being inexpensive cotton fabric. And so I wanted to show you some of these beautiful pieces here. See the different flowers that are on here? Those were pieces that were on your feed sacks. So a lot of times the families would use these to make quilts, but they also, my mom told me that she had she had clothes that her mom made her dresses out of these feed sacks. Aren't they pretty? So these were unbleached cotton, and so they could be used for dishcloths, diapers, and other things, as well as clothing and the quilts. So we are going to make our quilt templates today, and we won't use the flowers, but we'll use some that are different. But I thought I would share with you this beautiful quilt and invite you to come down and see it in person. So for our craft today, we're going to work with different shapes that were used to make quilt blocks. The different quilt blocks were sewn together to make the quilt larger. And we can use the templates and color your different quilt blocks with colors that make you happy, or you can get your mom or dad to cut out construction paper shapes and create your own quilt block that way.